Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com. We have a special guest with us. Dimitri Lascaris is a lawyer, journalist, activist with a track record of prosecuting securities fraud class actions against major Canadian and multinational corporations, He is a vocal commentator on geopolitical issues, particularly with regards to Western policies on Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, everybody's favorite topic. In 2012, he was selected by Canadian Lawyer magazine as one of the 25 most influential lawyers in Canada, He is the former justice critic of the Green Party of Canada, and is a former board member of the Real News Network. Wow, look at that. Please welcome to the show, Dimitri Lascaris. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did, and I want to thank you right off the bat for doing that, because that's not the usual pronunciation. But I also want to just clarify that I'm not a big fan of but I know a lot of my colleagues up here in Canada.
Oh, yeah. Oh, come on, You got to love So there's a breaking story I wanted to get your opinion on, because you talk about all things about Israel, Canada. Anti-NATO protesters in Montreal demand Canadian withdrawal from alliance. Let's just go over this quickly. About 80 people attended Saturday's anti-NATO protests in the city's downtown area, organized by Le Mouvement Québécois. I don't know how to say any of that. Holding signs that read Canada out of NATO and chanting solidarity with Palestine. Several in attendance held Communist Party and Canadian flags, while others held Palestinian flags. Jad Kabanji, president of the movement, said Canada should refuse to meet NATO military spending targets. That'd be nice. He also said that despite calling itself a defensive alliance, NATO has destabilized multiple regions across the globe and created military conflicts, notably in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Kabanji and said Israel's military campaign in Gaza would not be possible without the arms provided by NATO members like the United States, and that a policy of increasingly accepting countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union pushed Russia to invade Ukraine. Well, we got that right. Politicians in the Prime Minister's cabinet, opposition parties, as well as Quebec leaders have called the violence during Friday's anti-NATO demonstration acts of anti-Semitism. But protesters deny the claim, saying that demonstrated against complicity of NATO members countries in the war that has killed thousands of Palestinians. Friday's protest was organized by the group Divest for Palestine and the Convergence of Anti-Capitalist Struggles. Benoit Allard, a member of Divest for Palestine, said he and several other protesters were injured by police, and at least 4 protesters had to go to the hospital. So that's normally how it goes. Everything's cool till the cops show up. That's when the violence starts. He said the purpose of the protest was to demonstrate against what he called NATO's complicity with Israel's military while it's conducting its genocide in Gaza, war crimes in Lebanon and Syria, and that it's enforcing illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. On Saturday afternoon, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he called Friday's scenes appalling. Remember what he said about the truckers? It was all made up. He said the truckers were Nazis, waving Nazi flags, that they were violent. It was all made up. Acts of anti-Semitism, intimidation, and violence must be condemned wherever we see them. Yeah, in the government. There must be consequences and rioters held accountable. But no accountability for genocide. Quebec Premier Francois Legault also described the scenes as anti-Semitic. Burning cars and smashing windows is not about sending a message. It's about causing chaos. Such acts have no place in peaceful society like Quebec, he wrote. Okay. But dropping 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps, that has a place in Palestine. However, Divest for Palestine's Allard rejected accusations of anti-Semitism. Now, does that have to do with the Allard Prize? Because I know that guy. He said the protests were against the actions of the state of Israel and not Jewish people. Lots of Jews are against Israel's genocide. Lots of Jews are against Israel. Adding that earlier this week, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On Thursday, the court said in a news release that there were reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu committed the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. Greg Bion, the group's vice president, said the group condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but added NATO has helped provoke conflict in the region. Group members Rania El Gyarbi said she does not support violent protests, but added Canadians are becoming increasingly frustrated by Canada's support for Israel and lack of action in protecting Palestinians. Delegates from NATO member states and partner countries are in Montreal this weekend to discuss issues including support for Ukraine, climate change, and the future of the alliance. So that's quite a story. Let me bring in Dimitri. Dimitri, you kind of, this is right up your alley. Take it where you want. What would you like to say about this?
Well, this protest happened at the Palais de Congrès, which is this huge convention center, which is 2 blocks from my house, Jimmy.
Oh, really?
I live in downtown Montreal, a short walk away from it. I happened to be in Toronto on Thursday night giving a speech, and I arrived in Montreal by train right when the protest was happening. And I went immediately from the train station, which is about 10 minutes from the convention center, to the convention center. And when I got there, I didn't see any protesters. All I saw were riot cops everywhere. And I did notice a few broken windows, but I didn't see any major damage. There was, I saw video footage later of a damaged vehicle or two, but this was really minor vandalism. And the accounts that I get from people who were in that protest and who are friends of mine, longstanding, comrades in the anti-imperialist movement, they told me quite clearly that, in fact, it was the police who instigated the violence, which is not at all surprising for those of us who've been active in Montreal politics for many years, that they beat people. Some people had to go to hospital. They rained down tear gas on the protesters. And at the end of the day, by the way, all of the politicians quoted in that article are frothing at the mouth, notorious Zionists, every single one of them. The deputy leader of the Conservative Party, which is poised to win the next election in Canada, said that pro-Hamas terror mobs had taken over downtown Montreal.
Oh, my God.
That was pretty much, that was typical of the commentary I saw on social media. There's absolutely no evidence to back any of this up. You mentioned that brothers and sisters in the Jewish community support the Palestinian movement. There were many Jewish people in that protest, and yet they don't have any hesitation whatsoever, about accusing the protesters of being anti-Semites. And the other thing I want to say is today was the 4th day and the final day of that NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I went myself to the entrance. By the way, I'm a registered card-carrying member of the Canadian Union of Freelance Journalists, and I am systematically excluded when I apply for media accreditation to every government-organized event. Even when I have, a letter of assignment from an established media organization, they won't let me in. They never tell me why. So I went to the one entrance where the delegates were entering the convention center today, and I started asking them a question as they walked by me. And the question was, are Ukrainian lives more valuable than Palestinian lives? And it took about 5 minutes for me to be surrounded by cops, one of whom was grabbing my arm quite aggressively, bumping me, pushing me away from the door. Another one threatened to arrest me. They all know I'm a lawyer. They all know that I'm a law-abiding citizen. It doesn't matter to these people. And if they were willing to do that to me, a member of the press who is a lawyer in good standing and has been for decades, and they know this, you can imagine what they're doing to, just ordinary citizens in the street who are protesting this heinous genocide. So this narrative is complete malarkey, but this is, par for the course for what we see in the Canadian media.
Yeah. There's so many things that were predictable there, right? That they would call them anti-Semites, that they would accuse them of violence. They would, it's the exact same playbook they used during COVID. And we now know that the truckers were completely peaceful and joyous. And that, by the way, the truckers were vaccinated at a higher rate than the general population. They weren't protesting medicine. They were protesting authoritarianism. And they were right. In fact, it was ruled by the highest court in Canada that what Justin Trudeau did when he invoked the Emergency Powers Act, I'm not sure if that's what it's called, that was illegal. It was unconstitutional what he did. So same play. So go ahead, take it where you want.
I just want to comment on that, Jimmy, because this is also very personal to me. Look, I'm a leftist. I make no bones about that. I did get vaccinated when they had the vaccine passport system in place. I got double dosed. I got COVID within 6 months of getting my second dose. But I didn't object to the vaccine. The government asked me to do that, and I, like a good citizen, complied. But when I was hearing all about this stuff in Ottawa, I decided to go see for myself because I care very deeply about civil liberties, even though my politics may be different from many of the people who were in the streets of Ottawa. And my daughter at the time lived on a street where the truckers had planted themselves and were honking their horns relentlessly. And she was very upset about the disruption to her personal life. But I still went there with an open mind. And I was there on the day that the riot cops moved in and started arresting people. And I was standing right at the front line where the police were pulling these people off of the street, dragging them away. I did not see one single of those protesters engage in any violence. I didn't see any hate speech. I didn't see any Nazi symbols. In fact, I heard people who were clearly organizers urging the protesters not to engage in violence, not to react violently to the police oppression that they were experiencing. And so what I saw on the pivotal moment when the police were actually physically removing them from the streets was not at all consistent with the narrative. And I was one of the few people on the left, and I'm still to this day upset about this. I was one of the few people on the left who condemned Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act. And sure enough, even though many people on the left were saying this is exactly what is needed, the government has to take drastic measures. Last year, a Canadian court ruled that the use of the Emergencies Act violated the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is our equivalent of the Bill of Rights. So I do feel in a way vindicated by that, but it's really small consolation because at the end of the day, Trudeau got away with it. Yeah. He got away with draconian measures. He got away with it, stifling our free speech, and they've escalated that. They got away with that, and now we're seeing an even more repressive environment in Canada around the genocide and around this depraved proxy war that is escalating in Ukraine.
So, Dimitri, what do you think? Why is I always considered myself a member of the left, but the left. The left is now right authoritarian. So, if you consider yourself to be a lefty in Canada and you are on the side of the cops in this protest, or you're on the side of the cops during the truckers' COVID protest, you're not on the left anymore. You are siding with the authoritarians. You're siding with the oppressors. So first of all, how do you think that happened? How did those people lose all connection to their actual lefty values? And what kind of mental gymnastics do they have to do to pull that off?
I don't know, Jimmy. It's been a mystery to me. People in this country should know, based upon decades of experience, that our politicians are shameless liars. And they've been telling us all along. They invoke the language of progressivism. They use this humane rhetoric to, explain their support even for Israel or for the corrupt, far-right Ukrainian regime. And yes. I've seen a lot of people on the left, people who profess to be leftists, being sucked in by this propaganda system. And all I can tell you is, I go back to that seminal work by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, which talked about the efficacy of the propaganda system in the West. As much as we may be cognizant of it, it is really powerful. And even those of us who are kind of vaguely aware that it's out there and that it's influencing public opinion fall victim to it with far too great a frequency. And if we don't get our heads out of our asses, we're not going to have any freedom left very soon.
Yeah, I don't see much hope for the people who consider themselves traditional lefties. All the screaming about civil rights and all the standing up for free speech has come from people who are considered conservatives and traditionally on the right. It's sad. I mean, I certainly feel very alone here in Hollywood. And I always thought Canada was much more progressive than we were. But it turns out being a progressive these days means that you're an authoritarian, that you side with the dictators. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, as RFK Jr. pointed out on my show, when was the last, if they're for censorship, they're literally for censorship, and they get, like you said, they couch it behind a veil of protecting the marginalized. We want to stop hate speech. Well, unless that means you're against free speech. You hate free speech. You don't hate speech. You hate free speech. And as RFK Jr. said, when was the last time in history, when the people who are in favor of censoring or were doing the censoring were the good guys. Never historically were the people who are doing the censoring the good guys. So, well, it's good to see that Canada's standing up against the Ukraine and NATO's involvement in Ukraine. It's so hard for me here to get people to realize that, no, NATO is actually not a defensive organization. It's an aggressive, and we've been poking this, and we've been setting up this war in Ukraine for over a decade, maybe two. Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com.